All right, so here we're going to be looking a little bit at temple state religions, what they were all about, and how things change when we come into the Roman period. Oops. So first off, excuse me, with temple state religions, we're dealing here with religions that developed with the rise of civilizations, okay, where we get cities being built, agriculture has been developed, and so places like Sumer, in the Mesopotamian region there in present-day Iraq, Egypt, later on with Greece, the Aztecs, the Mayans. We don't know much about the Indus Valley civilization. Over in China, we have the Shang dynasty. But these are various civilizations that develop usually along river fronts and that become quite developed, and they also begin to develop writing in various sorts. And so we find here, in terms of religion, okay, we have rather elaborate pantheons developing in terms of a whole variety of deities. Often they're related to each other in one way or another, or what have you, but there's literally hundreds of deities. And they develop religious systems that are highly controlled by the priests, okay, with a focus on rituals and sacrifices done to the gods, largely on behalf of those who are ruling, the ruling class, the local emperor, the king, the pharaoh, what have you. And so they're not so much focused around beliefs, but rituals. And they're serving those who are in power, not the larger community of people, okay? That's a huge thing. And so with these various deities, we have all kinds of gods and goddesses with very specific powers that are called upon. And of course, you need experts to deal with that. So we do have a lot of knowledge about the Sumerians, where we have hundreds of thousands of texts and tablets. So we know a lot more about their religion than we do of virtually anybody else, the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and others. And just to make note here, in terms of the history of religion, we have quite a shift here from the priest now replacing the shaman who served the very intimate community of the local people. And here is the priest that's serving those who are in power. Oops. And so here's just a little bit of a picture of, the land of Sumer, which is in present-day Iraq, that we have there's the oldest civilization, the first civilization that developed around 4000 BC or so. And and then you have an example of a temple that was built. It was known as a ziggurat, there to the left. And we have similar buildings like that also over in Central America. And so it's been speculated that there must be some kind of connection, that perhaps people traveled across the water over to the Americas at some point. There is evidence of a lot of similarities throughout the world in terms of the types of buildings, different kinds of symbolism, beliefs, practices, all kinds of things. And that has led to many theorizing that there's sort of more of a united origins of all civilization in some way. So that's a very interesting topic, which I won't get into, but just want to highlight. So here on the bottom right, that's an example of a temple of the Aztecs over in Central America. Okay, so there's a lot of similarities here. So first off, just a little bit of an overview of some things. The temple was generally seen as being the house of God, the place here on earth that's sort of like their temple here on earth, that is sort of a representation for them here on earth, equivalent to what's in heaven. It's quite interesting that the Kaaba in Mecca in Islam is called the house of Allah. It is his house here on earth, directly under his house in heaven. And that's kind of a very ancient idea. So inside of these temples, and this is what you find in most temples even today, say, for example, especially in India, where there will be images of deities. And the image then would be treated as though it's living, alive, and would be clothed, fed, bathed, related to as though it's a living being. Okay, and as I mentioned, we see this still going on in India, this type of thing. The temples were generally very wealthy, in the sense there was land associated with that temple, various animals, and so it was also a power base of wealth. Okay. And the key focus of the temple and the priests was to serve the rulers, to serve the state. They were the religious specialists who had the expertise that often involved something that was inherited. They'd undergo quite an extensive training. Okay, and so then they formed their own type of, almost like, think of it like a union, a guild, that eventually, because it's inherited, becomes a type of social class. And that's what you see with the Brahmin priests in India. Okay. But, and so there generally would be a pantheon of deities, many deities in place here. Often with one main deity being central to a particular temple was quite common, especially with the Sumerians. As I mentioned, hundreds of deities. And then we'll see later on that there'll be a blending of deities in the Middle East here, from Egyptian to Greco-Roman and whatnot, and ancient Sumerian roots. The Sumerians are extremely detailed and have the most writings, okay, extensive writings that we have there. As I mentioned already, hundreds of thousands of texts. The Greeks really had no scriptures as such. The Aztecs and Mayans, they had a strong focus on apocalypticism and the cycle of time, and that there'd be colossal destruction of things with, first by fire, then flood, or else maybe first by flood and then fire. I forget now, but anyways, working with the elements. And so a strong focus there on aspects of nature. So that will show up in their texts and whatnot. And that's an example of a Mayan calendar to the right there. But the focus here is, again, the huge buildings that were involved here, the magnitude of palaces and temples, and then tombs, royal tombs are associated with these places. Again, serving those who were in power. There's basically a threefold purpose. Excuse me. First of all, to ensure a good afterlife, primarily for those who were in power, the aristocrats, the rulers. All right. And therefore, you'd find, we'll talk again, there's a lot of, like down below here, there's a lot of mention of human sacrifice. But they buried their rulers of the Egyptian, Sumerian, what have you, even in China and the Shang dynasty, when the king or whoever would die, along with many servants, military, perhaps horses, what have you, whatever they would need in the afterlife was taken with them to the other world. And of course, that involved human sacrifice. So the key of threefold purpose: to ensure a good afterlife for the rulers, number one. Number two, to appease the gods, to call upon the gods to protect the rulers, to protect the state and bring prosperity and success. Okay, so that was the second key thing, is to call upon the gods for these protection and power and whatnot. And then thirdly, it was also a display of status. All right, that our emperor is so great and so mighty, and so there'd be elaborate tomb built for him and the royal family. So sacrifices are very essential here. These are things that are given over to the gods. So I give to you so that you will give to me. And that's where, I see here, like you can read that below here, a couple of texts. In Rome, the formula invoked was, I give that you should give. I give to you so that you will then give back to me. Okay. Sumerian text for priests has this quote: the minds of God and the minds of man and gods are not different. You give them something to eat and drink. Just as like we like food and drink, so do the gods. And so you gift them with food and drink. All right. You gift them with presents. And that's what the sacrifices offer. They are gifts given over to the gods, so that the gods then will in return give back to you. So rituals of food offerings is universal. All right. And of course, the highest gift of all is, of course, life itself, a blood sacrifice. Anywhere from animals being sacrificed to humans being sacrificed. And human sacrifice is indeed something very universal. We find it all over the world. And what's really intense is, and Stark, and I make a lot of references here to Rodney Stark's book on discovering God, the origins of the great religions and the evolution of belief. Okay, and that's what all these page references will be too, is Stark's book. And so here he gives, he talks about it on these pages here, that huge numbers were involved. I mean, they found over 100,000 skulls piled up. And to inaugurate a new temple, there would be 4 lines of people, 2 miles long, with 20,000 people in each line as a victim to be sacrificed, okay, just to inaugurate and establish a new temple being built to secure the blessings of the gods upon it. And most of these would be slaves that were captured in war. So it was pretty brutal what went on back then. So what we have here is, in this context, the nature of religion here in this time period in these ancient civilizations, right, is where the state had tight control and monopoly over religion. So the priests were full-time, okay, hired full-time by the state. They alone dictated what would occur in terms of education. They were the religious experts, and it tended to be hereditary. The rituals were primarily done for the state or the king to please the gods, okay, and serve the gods in order to keep away disasters, to ensure protection and prosperity, okay, for the king and state. And along with this, we find that the rituals generally do not change. They are done exactly the same way. And the emphasis was always on precision. They had to be done just perfectly in the correct way. And so any sense of innovation or change is an error and is potentially very dangerous. The priests were specialized in different areas. Some would be have expertise in the study of omens, that is signs from the universe, you know, maybe changes in terms of astrology, the movement of the sun, the moon, the planets, maybe a comet that shows up, the signs of how birds fly or how different animals behave. There'd be various things in nature that would be signs as to what might come, what might be some guidance or information from the gods or spirits in some way. Dream interpretation is widespread all over the world, that you're more in tune to the world of the spirits through your dreams. That's where you can get guidance and information in various ways. All kinds of divination tools and techniques, they're all over the world. People using tools and methods to try to find out what the gods might be up to, what the future holds, to know, to be able to make, you know, the best choices, the best decisions on different things, right? And all this was to serve largely the rulers, okay? And then others had expertise in healing methods and modalities and techniques. Others were exorcists, removing evil spirits, removing curses, things like that. Okay, and others, again, very specific rituals that they were experts in. So whatever was needed, they all had various forms of expertise. Okay. So key thing is this was religion. They monopolized religion. It was under the control largely of the priests and the state in a sense. And any kind of novelty or change is resisted. It's seen as a threat, could lead to disaster. Okay, so everything was rather strongly fixed in terms of routines. And the key thing is no religious competition. Okay, it was allowed. There was no need for change, all right? So there's no religious competition. Now, the commoners, okay, the people, the peasants, so to speak, they are basically the servants and slaves to the gods and the rulers, okay? They were basically their servants. So religion basically served the elite. Here you get, you know, very much this tie between religion and politics. So people may go to the temples at times, but they didn't really belong to them. It isn't like what we have today in terms of, you know, being a member, being a part of a congregation, a community of believers that are involved in a religion. That isn't how it was back then. The temples were staffed exclusively by the priests here, and they were largely focused in serving their particular clientele, i.e. those who were in power, not the larger community. Okay, you were just automatically a part of the state. And so if things went well for your king and ruler, oh, then it would probably go well for you. All right, that was sort of the deal. So however, things start to change when we come into the Greek Empire. We find that there wasn't quite the same tight control over religion and between state and religion as it had been in past civilizations. Priests tended to be part-time. They tended to be non-professional, but just ordinary lay people, not having, not being a part of a hereditary class, okay, and not necessarily overly educated in various ways. It just things got a lot looser and freer here in terms of who would be employed or supported in some way here in terms of providing rituals. And what we find here as well is that as the Greek Empire expands and became very large in gaining new and different territory, it then amalgamated all kinds of people. There was a lot more diversity. People from the whole Middle Eastern region and beyond, right, all the way up over towards India, okay, and parts of like North Africa, the Middle East, and whatnot, and into Europe, so to speak, that there's a lot of diversity here. And so with that, there's more competition, right? A variety of ideas and beliefs. And so we find here religious movements starting to spring up outside of any kind of strict, tightly controlled temple state religion. And a key thing as well was that there was minimal state funding and state support for temples compared to in the past. All right. So that got minimized. There was little money put into religion by the state rulers. And so you do find different new kind of religious movements appearing at this time. And you can read about it here in Stark's text there, the Pythagoreans and Orphics, for example. Okay. But then things, things really start to change when we come into the time of with the rise of Rome and the Roman Empire. Now, Stark emphasizes that the religious history of Rome generally parallels the evolution of religion in general. That the Romans basically began just as a tribe worshiping tribal deities, and that built then a city and sustained a particular public temple in that city. And the very beginnings of the city of Rome is somewhere around 700 BC, but we don't really know that much of this early period of Rome in terms of what people believed and did and whatnot. The written accounts are about 600 years later. But what we do know is there seemed to be a prominence and emphasis of religious ceremony at every public event with an emphasis on offering sacrifices to the gods. Okay. And again, what was important here is that there be no errors, that they be perfectly done in reciting the formulas, the prayers, all right, that would be involved, or there could be disastrous results. And also, again, this continuation of nothing is done without divination, checking out what are the signs, the omens, what are the birds up to, the use of oracles, that is certain people going into a bit of a trance state, like a psychic or a medium, right, and getting some kind of a message. The reading of entrails, that is sacrificing an animal and yet first posing the question, what you want some guidance and insight on, calling upon the gods to please speak to me now through this animal I'm about to sacrifice, say like a sheep or something, and you cut it open and the answer to your question will be there in the entrails, in the innards of that animal in terms of I'm not sure what kind of organs they're looking at here, if it's the liver or something, that will then give indication and answer to the question that they asked. So there'll be various techniques. Okay, that's known as haruspicy. Excuse me. Where am I here? Oh, this always moves so fast. Now, the gods of Rome were largely the gods of the state, not necessarily that of the people themselves, of individuals, of the masses. Okay. And as Rome expanded the empire, conquering new territories, right, just as the Greeks had done earlier, they actually built very few temples themselves as a republic, okay, by the state. Okay, the Senate didn't really build that many new temples. Instead, any new temples were largely built by the locals to their gods with Roman approval. Many were built by the military, where they'd make vows or prayers to certain deities in order to win a battle. That was quite common. But also, as Rome had expanded, it sort of incorporated and amalgamated the new gods, okay, the gods of the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Sumerians of the past. Okay, they kind of got all amalgamated and somewhat syncretized together. Okay. And so what emerges is a blended pantheon of various deities that kind of brought together and blend together. And in the next slide, there's a bit of a picture of all that. But we do find happening here the rise of what's known as the mystery religions, sort of secretive groups that became, they're almost like, again, a form of new religions that are emerging here. And so pluralism, religious pluralism develops here in the Roman Empire. Okay, because of so much diversity of so many people and so many deities and with it different ideas, that stimulated, okay, that plurality stimulated various combinations, new combinations emerging here in a sense. And with it, different teachings of various kinds started emerging. Because again, there wasn't such strict state control over everything as there had been in the past with temple state religions. Okay. So here is just a bit of a picture of the deities here, the 12 Olympian gods, and hopefully you can maybe read that. I'll just have it here. You can pause and look at it through here with the Greek name and how the Roman name that is associated with it, but basically it's the same deity. Sometimes there's a bit of a change in the names and sometimes not so much of a change in the name, but the concept and principles and different attributes associated with the deity stays the same. Okay. Okay. So some distinctive things here to note. Under the Romans then, religion was largely unregulated and little subsidized by the state. Okay. The Roman Republic did not impose a system of state temples. And that then allowed for the evolution of a free type of marketplace for religion and therefore religious competition. Okay. The result is that each temple then had to appeal to the public, attract people as followers, right, in order to get support, because they depended upon the people, patrons, all right, to willingly donate money to that temple to keep it going. Right? So we've got religious competition happening here. The temples were not served by full-time professional priests, but rather by lay people. Okay, they weren't professionals, but kind of doing it part-time, all right, on the side. And so the temples then were not a power base for the priestly class, nor the state itself. Okay. So we basically see here the end of temple state religions. The Greeks are kind of a bit of a transition here, and now we see really it coming to an end under the Romans. And we have religious pluralism and competition developing here. And so this is a key thing here. In a fairly free market religious economy, now, this is all the lingo you get in the sociology of religion, okay? A free market religious economy. The religions, temples, and gods are now required to compete for support from the people, popular support. Okay, it's like the people have to be attracted. They have to want to get involved, want to worship this God or be a part of this group. All right, because it's not being enforced upon them. And this opened the door for an influx of new religious activity or new religions to start to emerge or new religions to start to flourish in some way. Excuse me. And so what we find happening now here is with this kind of religious pluralism, we do find various groups emerging and that to attract people, right, there's it's a different ball game here. The senses are appealed to in the sense that instead of just doing official state religion of these dry rituals of just a sacrifice to a god with the particular formula or prayer that's said in a perfect way, there now is emotional engagement where there'll be the use of music, the use of dance, the use of singing. It's a religion of the people that, you know, again, this is something you'd find in more indigenous traditions where the people themselves are engaged and going back to use of music like drumming and chanting and singing and dancing, the ingestion of, well, perhaps alcohol and plant substances to induce an altered state. This is sort of what goes on in some of these mystery religions that develop this time. And so you have these sorts of things going on, right, where there's that kind of more emotional, physical engagement, but also a focus on the desires and needs of the individuals, of the people themselves, as opposed to the state rulers, where people then like, hey, what about my soul? What happens to me when I die? How can I develop myself spiritually in some way, become more enlightened in some way, or develop some sort of superpowers in some way, right? And how can I be more empowered in this life to cope with things, reduce stress and anxiety, attain healing, physical healing, emotional healing, what have you, in various levels. I mean, I'm using the lingo of today, all right? But this is what people be looking for. And so there also was, we find at this time now, with writing having developed a diversity of ideas going on, there are more and more books, more and more literature that people have access to, more and more so-called scriptures and holy books that are starting to develop and being put together. And so there's more intellectual engagement, and with that, people philosophizing more and reflecting on what is life all about. You know, what is the nature of deity or divinity? Is there one God or many gods? You know, what should we think about the gods? What happens when you die? And all those sorts of things really start percolating here. Okay, and this is going to be the hotbed out of which a lot of religious, the world religions will come out. I'm just here specifically talking about Rome, but you'll find this elsewhere, as I'll mention. In this time period from about 600 BC onward is a very pivotal time in the birthing of most world religions. That's where things really get developed in terms of with Israel and Judaism, over in China, Lao Tzu and Taoism, Confucianism, the Buddha over in India. Okay, Hinduism is really developing at this time to become what it, you know, basically is it today in a lot of ways, right? It all really gets cooking here around 600 BC onward. All right, it becomes a very creative time in terms of religion, so to speak. Okay. So anyways, this is kind of going back here, though, specifically to Rome, because this is, again, he talks about, Stark does here in these pages. So we have here people then coming together as a community, members meeting regularly. There's a lot of social rewards, you know, just again, that emotional, social, relational connection one to another. Again, it's very different from the official state religion. It's far more intense, meaningful, fulfilling, right? And it involves more personal commitment as individuals being more involved and committed to that religion, as opposed to it just being a dead ritual done by the state. Okay. And so, in terms of, yeah, the state religion didn't really have a holy book of any kind. But a lot of these new religions growing up, they did have all kinds of literature that they were associated with in various ways. And this is the context too, where Christianity as a new religion, all right, really gets going as well. Okay. People became very active in these intimate groups with fellow believers. Okay, it's far more communal and social compared to official state religion. And it also called for a higher degree of commitment. And so it's all the more intense. And people then gained a clearer sense of religious identity as an individual and being a part also of a religious group as an active community, very close knit. Okay, so these are all factors that come into play. And so Roman rulers began to fear such groups as being possible sources of dissent. All right, and this is very interesting because this is what you see. Religion is always a potential threat to the state and to governments. We'll see this play it out. Well, yeah, I don't know if we'll talk about it here, but in the history of China, that happens, where various Taoist sects emerged and almost overthrew the Chinese empire at times. Again, about the first century, you know, of the Common Era, like in this time frame, that's happening over in China, right? So that, and it's even like today, look at what's going on in China, for example, and the the persecution of Muslims in China and also Christians. And this all has happened throughout history. When people are very committed religiously, they are above all committed to a higher source above the government. And if it gets too intense, that kind of commitment, they're always a threat to the establishment, to the system, okay, to the political system. So that plays out throughout history. So anyways, so what we see here in Rome is a difference between religious involvement as state ceremony with rituals of sacrifice, formal prayers, right? That versus more personal, emotionally engaged religion requiring serious commitment by individuals by choice, okay? And that's committed faith by the individual, as opposed to going through these dead rituals of the state. That's nominal faith. You're just going along with the name of it, that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do as a Roman citizen, and I'm just obliging and conforming to what the state is expecting me to do, right? That's nominal faith, as opposed to committed faith. So the lack of state control over religion then allowed for this kind of pluralism, allowing for this diversity of engagement. So now there are people who have a choice. If they're just content with a low commitment type of engagement, of just going along with the state religion, of going along with these official ceremonies done by the state, as opposed to those who aren't satisfied with that and they want something more intense, a higher level of commitment that's also more meaningful and fulfilling for them as individuals in some way, right? Then they'll be drawn into a different type of religious orientation, a different type of group. Okay. So over time, the Roman Empire, as it began to decay, they really saw, as I mentioned already, as a threat, these tightly knit kind of religious gatherings. All right. And so they made any gathering of 5 or more people in a religious group as illegal in order to stop the meetings of certain groups. Okay. And this is one factor that led to, at certain times, the persecution of Christians. And especially as, the Roman Empire felt itself getting weaker and struggling to maintain its position of power, then it got more intense. They felt the problem was, okay, well, yeah, I've got it written down here, that the decline of the empire was seen as being a result of a neglect of the Roman gods. The reason why the Roman Empire is getting weaker is because not enough of the people are worshiping the Roman gods and doing these rituals and sacrifices. Okay, so they start imposing that this be mandatory. And of course, for the Christians, there's no way they would worship other gods, right? That's what led to the martyrdom of the Christians. Okay, so just some things here to highlight in terms of sociology of religion, because Stark is a sociologist of religion, right? And so again, just some points and terminology here that's really useful to be aware of in the study of religion in a broader sense. So first off, he holds, and it's and I find it hard to disagree with this, pluralism. Okay, religious pluralism is the natural state of religion in any society, but yet it's not the usual state. Usually, religious pluralism is suppressed in favor of monopolies. And now he's speaking from the history of religion worldwide, okay? Generally most states, they love to have control over religion, and that there be a monopoly of religion, that there's one religion that's dominant in any society. It makes it a lot easier to maintain control of that society. If everybody believes the same thing, if everybody's a part of the religion, it's a lot easier to keep that state in power, okay? Because there aren't going to be any disruptors at play. But that is, in a sense, artificial. It's something that has to be coerced upon society, all right, to prevent competition. Because if competition isn't criminalized in a sense, pluralism naturally arises because people naturally like to have a choice. People naturally would want freedom to believe what they want to believe and have a freedom of religion. So when religious monopolies prevail and are dominant, the overall level of public religious involvement will be low. Okay. And this is a key thing, and you'll find it if it is so enforced and it's just a given that everybody has to be of one particular religion and you don't have any choice allowed, then their involvement and, excuse me, even their emotional commitment to it will not be as intense. It's going to be a lot lower, right? Excuse me. And I suspect that, say, for example, you know, well, I don't know, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to hold off on that. So it's just to be aware of that, okay? If everybody is, just, I don't know, everybody has to be a Muslim, say for a lot of Muslim countries, okay? For many of them, Islam is dominant and religious pluralism is generally not allowed. Okay, so that, say, in Iran, Baha'is are persecuted. Many people are persecuted in a lot of these countries. And there's minimal religious freedom. And so it's just dominant that there's the one religion. So yes, how many are really committed to that religion in the full sense, if it's so imposed upon them by the state, is a whole nother question. Okay, there's little choice. Are they willing to give up and go against that state and yet be thrown in prison for it? Well, they'd have to believe very strongly in order to be willing to do that, right? So people generally don't. And so they could be, yes, call themselves, say, for example, a Muslim, but they'll smoke, they'll drink, they'll just do whatever on the side. They won't do their prayers 5 times a day, but yet they'll basically conform enough just so long as they don't get into trouble, right? So that's where you can easily get kind of that low level of commitment when it's just dominant, when you have a monopolization in a state, okay? And so anyway, just to kind of highlight that part. In this more natural state, which is pluralistic, okay, then you'll find quite a variety of independent religious suppliers. Because again, he's looking at like an economy, right? And you got supply, demand. He says it's not really about the demand, but supply. And that is, if you don't have any domination by one religion or the state restricting religion in some way and making anything dominant, right? Pluralism becomes the norm, okay? Because what happens is that for a religion to gain attraction, it's got to compete. It's like, hey, I want you to come to my church instead of that one, or I want you to be a part of this religion as opposed to that one. And so they've got to compete to get members, to get people to be involved, to be a part of it in some way. Okay, so that competition is a huge factor at play here. Okay, to gain followers, because it isn't automatically, followers aren't automatically given to you through coercion. Okay, you have to work to get followers. All right, you have to compete against other religions to get those followers. So then what you find here is a diversity of the degree, the intensity and type of religious adherence, because different people like different things. All right, people like a variety of religious engagement. All right, in terms of both depth of engagement, if it's low intensity or high intensity, and also the type, the different kinds of religions. People love choice and diversity. Okay, so the market theory of religion proposes that religious competition increases the overall religiousness of a population. It follows that because subsidized monopoly religions gain no benefits from popular support, they will not exert themselves to engage the public. Okay, so when religions have to work harder to attract followers, okay, then in doing that, they have to make themselves more enticing, more engaging, and therefore they then have to increase their level of commitment. And they do it by making it more attractive so people will want to be more committed. Okay, people will want to be more committed. So then if people want to be more committed, you get then higher levels of religiosity. So this is a bit of the game that can go on in terms of religion in society. Okay, just be aware of some of these things. Okay, I'm just taking this as an opportunity to bring into the picture here some of these things, and then too, because Stark kind of talks about all this. Okay, so what do we all see here from this? Well, ruling elites usually suppress religious innovation. Priest temple religions, okay, the priests with the temple religions, serving the elites, the ruling classes, they rarely introduce anything new. It's all about supporting and sustaining the status quo. And this is where you get the marriage between religion and politics playing out, okay? And that's kind of done its gig throughout history and even yet still today. Change is largely brought about by outsiders. All right. And this is something he'll talk about more as we go along through the book and as we talk about the rise of new religions or different religions. In order to succeed, okay, the founders of new religions have to gain a pretty large following, okay, to really get a movement going. And so they need to get then public support, a large public support, in order to hold out against any kind of opposition. Okay. And so that's what's going to happen in the West, in the Roman era, with respect to Christianity, and that at first, it's so persecuted, you're put to death for it, all right, for centuries there. And then even by the time we get to Constantine in the year 313, when he converts, the Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity and converts in 313 and makes Christianity legal to stop the persecution. By that time, over 10% of the Roman Empire had become Christian, even though they were being persecuted. So there was already such widespread following and support, okay, that it even led to the conversion of the emperor at that point. And that changed the whole game, where then Christianity then, by the year 380, became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. So we had this major shift happening. But, it was a new religion. Okay. So religious innovation often comes from outsiders. A shaman who, in the past would have been a shaman, but as religions evolve, is now called a prophet, or maybe an enlightened guru or spiritual master of some kind, be it over in India or China, who challenges the status quo, challenges the establishment. I mean, this is what we're going to see with the Buddha. This is what we're going to see with Confucius. This is what we're going to see with Lao Tzu over in China, right? They challenge the status quo, the establishment, seeking reform, seeking change, okay? And gathering enough followers and eventually kicking off a new religion, right? This is kind of what we'll see in the history of religion, all right? And so even among the Israelites, for example, in Judaism, the history of Judaism and the religion of ancient Israel, we have priests, we have a state religion, right? They did their rituals and all that, but the prophets were the ones that sometimes would challenge that, would challenge how things were done, how things were understood, how they were interpreted, okay, and brought the word of God to the king, to the rulers, right, that they need to change their ways. It's not enough just to do these rituals of sacrifices, but they also had to be moral in terms of social justice issues, all right, and that plays a key role in the development of Judaism. And so through the prophets, their teachings get put into books, right? And these things get added on to the scriptures later on. And then with the temple being destroyed by the Romans, we have the end of the temple state religion, so to speak. Okay, even though they didn't have their freedom under the Romans, but they still had their temple, right, with the rituals and the priests. That all was brought to an end. And then Judaism continued on in adapting to all of that because of the prophets and others that they then relied upon, okay, for how their religion kind of continued on from that. Okay, so hopefully all this makes some sense. It helps if you do all my classes. Okay. So yeah, I already mentioned this religious economy concept that Stark works with, okay? That a religious economy consists of all the religious activity going on in a society and a market of current and potential adherents, a set of one or more organizations that are seeking to attract or maintain their adherents, the believers, right? And the religious culture offered by that organization or whatever religious organizations exist. Okay, that's basically how he defines what a religious economy is. Okay, it's basically all the religious activity that's going on. Okay, and to see it like as a market of competition. Right, they have to attract believers. Okay, and with this as a factor, people then they like to have a choice, and they will do so if they have those options. And when religious pluralism shows up, there's competition. And that happens when the state is not monopolizing religion by removing any choice. And this is what so characterizes the West, but especially so America, so to speak, because through the American Constitution, freedom of religion and the separation of state and church, that the state cannot in any way dictate what people are to believe religiously. That was just so implanted in the American Constitution, okay, that then religious pluralism has been very much the game in America above anywhere else, really. And that then has also made it the most diverse. We find a lot of new religious movements coming out of America, but we also see that America is also one of the most religious countries. Okay, so this is a key thing. This is why Stark's saying what he's saying, because that's his background is sociology of religion, and specifically in America. And so that all feeds into this in terms of this whole concept. Okay. Well, anyways, I'm kind of repeating myself here on this. Pluralism is a natural state. Okay. Even if there's only one religion, people like to have a choice of the degree and type of commitment. Okay. If they're going to be more zealous and committed, or just more moderate and low key, to be a priest and a cleric, or just a layperson, to be a mystic following the Sufis, or just kind of going through the motions of going along with it, right? That is the norm. People like to have those options. A monopoly is the usual state of so this is the natural state, but the usual state is monopoly, because governments are uncomfortable with too much pluralism because it causes tensions. Okay, I mean, you can even see it in the States. There's a lot of tensions because of a lot of the religious pluralism. So pluralism is usually suppressed in favor of religious monopolies, but they are artificial and coerced. Those monopolies are artificial and coerced. Competition will often be persecuted in ways or try to stop it in some ways. You've even got like today the whole cancel culture. You can't say this, you can't do that because it's going to offend somebody or whatever. That's getting so strong, is really playing out in those terms today, is what we're seeing. But yet without competition, without a variety of voices, a variety of opinion, this applies to academia as well as religion, there's no innovation. Okay, it's going to lead to stagnation, and it's going to be detrimental if we do not allow for freedom and allow for true pluralism. Okay, often it's always said, yes, we are pro diversity, but are we really? Because why is it we're always shutting down voices that we don't like, and calling everybody a bigot if they don't agree with what I think? This is what's going on too much today. So anyways, without competition, there's no innovation, and overall the public or engagement with official religion would become low. It gets lower, and popular, and that's why populism is been rising, is because it's a rebellion against the loss of freedom. Okay, but popular or folk religion, okay, that's religion of the people themselves, not what's being dictated to them by the state, but what the people themselves want, is always going to get higher. Okay, and it's in the human spirit is committed to freedom, needs freedom, and wants freedom. And so that's why that is the natural state of any religious economy, and it should be the natural state of any kind of ideological kind of context. Really, we need freedom of thought along with freedom of living, of religion. Religious competition increases the overall religiosity of a population, because subsidized monopoly religions gain no benefits from popular support. Okay, so again, they won't then exert themselves to engage the public. Instead, they're going to try to force it by law. That's what they have to resort to, is it needs to be coerced in a legal way, because they won't get the attraction, the support, if it's done through freedom of choice. And that's what we need to watch out for, especially today. We're losing a lot of freedoms here in our society. And there are more and more laws being passed, and more censoring that goes on, more and more canceling of things going on, because there's less and less support of what's being dictated to people. And that's why we've got what's all going on out there in terms of the rise of what many people are calling today populism. Similar kind of game being played out here. Okay, and this is the last little slide, just again to highlight from some definitions that he's got here in the book. Religion, sects, magic, just so you know. Religion, and this is basically what I've talked about before when I talk about the nature of religion, that what religion's all about, yeah, explanations of existence, but working with supernatural assumptions. I call them trans-empirical realities, okay? That's what sets religion apart from a philosophy or a political system, is its connection to this whole idea there exists trans-empirical realities. And they then provide the context for our understanding about life. Okay, an explanation of existence. Man, I can't even talk straight. And magic involves the effort to manipulate the supernatural for desired outcomes. Okay, pretty straightforward. And a sect is a religious group that calls for a more intense level of commitment, and so is in some tension with the religious establishment. And again, you know, I'm not doing it here, but in sociology of religion, they work with church, sect, cult typology. And so a sect is a group within a religion, all right, that generally calls for a greater intense level of commitment. Okay, that's usually how it's seen here. So you'll have, you know, oh, I don't know, you know, you'll I don't know, would be a good example. Well, a good example for me here would be, say, Hinduism. Hinduism is a religion, but a particular sect within Hinduism would be the Hare Krishnas, because they have a very high level of commitment to devotion to Krishna as the supreme being, as God, right? With very specific practices and whatnot associated with that. So it's a Hindu sect, okay? So you'll have this, you know, or Baptists is a sect within Christianity, all right? It's a particular type of level of commitment that's more specific and more defined, and generally a higher level of commitment if somebody wants to call themselves a Baptist, as opposed to just a more generic word like, oh, I'm a Christian, okay? As opposed to being Muslim or Hindu or whatever, right? So anyway, just so you're a bit aware of that. And as a movement, sects tend to advocate social change to reflect religious ideals. Like, yeah, they're calling more for that you need to be more committed to that religion in order for the benefits of it to really show up in society in some way, okay? So that, say, for the Hare Krishnas, you know, they're very committed to vegetarianism, to their daily devotions of chanting, you know, the great mantra, okay, and that will benefit rest of society in terms of how they live. You know, they're also committed to a lot of other things, you know, in terms of more of a, I don't know if you want to call it green way of living, obviously by, you know, not eating meat and things like that, and growing your own food. They're definitely advocates for that sort of stuff as well. Okay, so you kind of get that kind of blend happening. Of course, and of course, more intense emotional engagement is always a key thing. Okay. And so, yeah, whenever a dominant religion gets weaker, you'll find then more sects emerging. And you find this, for example, in the Muslim world, certain areas, depending where you are, the Sufis, different Sufi groups, like, you know, being into Rumi in Iran, for example, the Persian mystic Rumi, and the Sufi mystical sect and teachings around Rumi and his writings, you know, well, that's where then, as a Muslim, in Iran, you would get more fulfillment and intense spiritual engagement by being part of a Sufi group. And in terms of readings and gatherings with music and, you know, you may whirling dervishes and things like that, perhaps, what have you, okay? So you'll find that sort of thing going on. Okay, so but that's a sect within Islam. Okay, I'm babbling on here. So that's enough on this for today, and hopefully it all makes some sense.